Welcome back, everyone, to CrimePod Castle, Unsolved Mystery Series, Episode 69. Tonight, we're diving into a case that's, it's captivated a lot of you listeners. The unsolved death of Meghna. And you've sent us a ton of information on this one, so we're ready to unpack it all. For those just tuning in, Meghna was a rising star in the Bengaluru theater scene, just brimming with talent, on the verge of something big. But sadly, in 2015, her story took a dark turn.
Yeah, it's one of those cases that reminds us that, every single detail, even the smallest thing, it could be a piece of the puzzle.
Oh, absolutely. So let's try and paint a picture of Meghna for our listeners. 'Cause she was so much more than just talented. I mean, she really poured her heart and soul into her craft.
Yeah, and that really makes this case so interesting. Because from what we've gathered, her dedication was incredible. Rehearsals, writing in her free time, she was even mentoring others. This was way more than a career for her. It was a passion.
Yeah. You really get that sense when you read the accounts from her colleagues, too. One of them mentioned she was always the last one to leave rehearsals, perfecting every little nuance of her performance. So it's clear that Meghna was on this amazing path, which makes her sudden death all the more shocking and tragic, really.
Yeah, it does. And the circumstances surrounding the night of April 15th, 2015, those just make the mystery even deeper.
Right, because we see this really stark contrast. One moment she's leaving rehearsal, it's around 10:30 p.m., she's calling a friend, sounds happy and focused, and then just hours later she's found in an alleyway, just a few blocks from her own apartment.
And the specifics of that discovery, those are key. Severe head injury, her bag and phone were both missing, but her jewelry and cash, untouched.
Yeah, that's what stood out to me right away. If this was a robbery, why wouldn't they take everything?
It is one of the biggest discrepancies in this case. Makes you really question the motive, right? Like, was robbery just a cover-up for something else? Or is there a completely different explanation?
It's almost like we're starting with a puzzle where some of the pieces are already missing, you know? So let's dive into the actual police investigation itself. What were they able to uncover?
Well, they were definitely thorough. A full autopsy, witness interviews, they reviewed CCTV footage. They really, really tried to put the pieces together, figure out what happened.
So let's start with the autopsy. What did that reveal?
The autopsy confirmed the cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. It was a fatal blow. But here's the thing, it couldn't conclusively determine whether it was accidental or intentional. It could have been a fall, an assault. I mean, the ambiguity, that just adds another layer of complexity.
So even those basic questions we have, was this an accident or was there foul play? We don't have the answers. Were they able to find any trace of her missing belongings?
Unfortunately, no. And that's another frustrating dead end in this case. Initially, the missing bag, the missing phone, that pointed towards a possible robbery. But then when you factor in that the valuables were left untouched, well, it really casts doubt on that theory.
It feels like we keep hitting these roadblocks. What about witnesses? Did anyone actually see or hear anything that night?
There were some reports of a loud noise around midnight coming from the alley where Meghna was found, but no one actually saw anything that they would consider suspicious. And the CCTV footage, well, it captured Meghna walking on the main street, but there's no footage of her actually entering the alley.
So we have a gap in the timeline, no clear witnesses, and the evidence seems to point in multiple directions. Lot to untangle here.
It really is, and that's why those tiny details, the ones that might seem insignificant, those become crucial. Every single piece of information has to be analyzed in relation to the other pieces, searching for connections, inconsistencies, anything that could shed some light on what truly happened that night.
It's almost like looking for a pattern in a whirlwind. So let's maybe shift our focus to the various theories that emerged from the investigation, each one trying to answer that big question. What happened to Meghna?
Well, the investigation led to 4 main theories. Each one tries to explain, tries to tie together those scattered pieces of evidence we have. So let's break them down one by one, look at the strengths, the weaknesses, what makes sense, what doesn't.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with the first theory. What are we looking at?
Well, the simplest explanation, and I say that kind of cautiously, is an accidental fall.
Okay, so the theory being that Meghna slipped, hit her head, and that was it. Just a tragic accident.
Exactly. That alley was poorly lit, the surface is uneven. It's definitely a plausible scenario.
It is. But then wouldn't someone have heard something, if she fell? And what about her missing bag and her phone? Those don't really fit with this simple fall, do they?
That's where this theory starts to fall apart, so to speak. A fall alone wouldn't explain those missing items. And if you remember, the witnesses who reported that loud noise, they described it more like a struggle, not just a single thud or something.
Okay, yeah. So accidental fall, it's looking less likely as we consider the evidence. What's the next theory?
Robbery gone wrong. That's the second one.
Okay, yeah. I mean, at first glance, that makes sense, right?
Right.
Her bag and her phone are missing. Maybe a thief grabbed them and ran.
Right. And sometimes those robberies, they can escalate, especially if the victim puts up a fight. However, there are some things that don't quite add up with this one.
Let me guess. It's those untouched valuables, right? Big red flag.
Exactly. A typical robber, they're going to take anything and everything of value, right? So leaving those items behind, it raises a whole lot of questions. Also, the scene itself, it didn't really show signs of a struggle, which you might expect if Meghna had fought back.
Okay, so robbery, probably less likely too. On to theory number 3 then. What are we thinking now?
This one's a little more unsettling, a targeted attack.
Meaning someone deliberately sought her out, went after her, and harmed her.
Yeah. Now, we don't have any direct evidence to support this, but it's a possibility that we can't just ignore. I mean, the brutality of that head injury, the fact that her belongings are missing, maybe they were taken to get rid of evidence, these things do raise some serious red flags.
Did the police have any suspects at all? Anyone with a motive to want to hurt Meghna?
They looked into people from both her personal and professional life, but nothing really concrete came up. No clear motive, no history of conflict with anyone.
Another theory with some missing pieces then.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the final theory, right?
Right. And it's definitely the most speculative of the four. Stalking or obsession.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. What made investigators even consider that as a possibility?
Well, some of Meghna's friends told police that she had mentioned feeling uneasy in the weeks leading up to her death, like she was being watched, followed, that kind of thing.
Chilling. Did she ever actually report those feelings to the police, though?
No, she didn't. There were no official complaints filed, and the investigation didn't turn up any hard evidence of a stalker.
So we've got 4 theories. Each has its pros and cons, but none of them perfectly fits with all the evidence we have. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces are all from different boxes.
That's a good way to put it. And it just shows how incredibly difficult this was for the investigators. Without some new evidence, it's almost impossible to definitively say what happened to Meghna that night.
I bet that lack of closure is really difficult for her loved ones. Just adds another layer of pain to an already awful situation.
Absolutely. I mean, beyond the theories and all the speculation, this is a human tragedy, right? A life that was full of potential cut short. It leaves her loved ones with all these unanswered questions, this profound sense of loss.
It reminds us that these cases, these aren't just like abstract puzzles we're trying to solve. Real lives are affected. And the ripple effects of an unsolved crime, those can last for years and years. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about Meghna's legacy. Even though her life was cut short, she clearly made a big impact.
Oh, absolutely. From everything we've learned, she was such a force in that Bengaluru theater community. Incredibly talented, her passion was contagious, and so dedicated to her craft.
It just makes this case all the more heartbreaking, It's not just a life lost. It's the loss of all that potential, all those dreams that will never be realized.
Yeah. And it raises these really tough questions about safety, about justice. How could someone so talented, so well-loved, connected to her community, how could she just vanish from a busy street and end up dead in an alley?
It really makes you think, like, who is safe? What can we do to prevent these tragedies from happening?
It's a sobering thought, and it shows just how important it is to keep searching for answers, even in cold cases like this. We can't let these mysteries just fade away.
Because each unsolved case, it's a failure of the system, isn't it? A failure to bring justice, to bring closure to the people who deserve it most.
I couldn't agree more. And while we may never have all the answers, we can't stop asking the questions. We have to keep looking for the truth and honor the victims by demanding accountability.
So where does that leave us, right? I mean, we've gone through the evidence, we've looked at all the different theories, but that central question, what happened to Meghna, that's still unanswered.
It really is a question that just continues to linger, doesn't it? For the investigators, for her family and friends, even for people just, following the case. That lack of closure, that has to be the hardest part.
It does feel like we're missing that one key piece of the puzzle, that one piece that could just make everything click into place.
It's possible that piece is out there, though, right? Maybe hidden in plain sight. Maybe a witness will suddenly remember something they didn't think was important before. Or maybe, a new technology comes along, something that can be used to re-examine the evidence we already have and find something new.
There's always hope, right?
Yeah.
Even after all these years, a cold case, it can heat back up if we get that one break. And that's why it's so important to keep these stories alive, to keep asking those questions, and to keep pushing for answers.
I completely agree. Cases like Meghna's, they can't just become another statistic. Every victim deserves justice, and their families deserve answers. They deserve closure.
It's a stark reminder that, each of these unsolved mysteries, they represent a story that hasn't been told, a truth that's still hidden.
And to the listener who brought this case to us, thank you for sharing Meghna's story. We may not have the answers, but I hope this deep dive at least gave you some new things to think about, maybe even raise some new questions for you.
And to all our listeners, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Meghna's case? Was there anything that particularly stood out to you? Do you have your own theories? Let us know in the comments. Join the discussion. Keep this conversation going.
Because sometimes it's that collective curiosity, that shared determination to find the truth that can really make all the difference.
And as always, if you're enjoying these deep dives into unsolved mysteries, make sure you subscribe to CrimePod Castle for more intriguing stories and, for more thought-provoking discussions. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those minds sharp.